In Pride and Prejudice, much attention is given to the romantic ideals of Elizabeth Bennet and the fiery chemistry between her and Mr. Darcy. But what about the women who didn't have the luxury of choosing love? One such fascinating character in Jane Austen's novel is Charlotte Lucas, a woman who makes a pragmatic choice in a world where women's futures were dictated by marriage. In this video, I'm going to explore her character, her friendship with Elizabeth, her views on marriage, and her relationship with Mr. Collins. As we know, Charlotte Lucas is the eldest daughter of Sir William and Lady Lucas, a respectable but not wealthy family living near the Bennets. She's a 27-year-old woman, which in Regency England was considered dangerously close to spinsterhood. Without beauty, wealth, or many prospects, she's actually caught in a difficult social limbo. She's too well born to marry beneath her, yet too plain and poor to attract a wealthy suitor. Her father, William Lucas, was knighted, which gave the family a certain social standing. However, their wealth did not match their title, meaning that Charlotte had little to offer in terms of a dowry. In a society where women's values were often tied to their marriageability, Charlotte is at a disadvantage and she knows it. Now, I am quite aware that Lucy Scott portrays Charlotte Lucas admirably well and actually is quite beautiful. So if we think that a 27-year-old spinster who doesn't have beauty, did the 1995 adaptation get it right? And by comparison to the 2005 version, where Claudie Blakely plays Charlotte Lucas, we can see the comparison between the two in terms of the beauty. And it may well be that the 2005 adaptation perhaps portrayed Charlotte Lucas in a more plain view or sight, if that makes sense. What do you think? Charlotte's defining trait is pragmatism. She tells Elizabeth outright,
"I'm not romantic, you know. I never was. I ask only a comfortable home."
So unlike Elizabeth, who dreams of love, Charlotte accepts the harsh reality of her world. A woman of her standing must marry for security, not passion. Despite their close friendship, Charlotte and Elizabeth see the world very differently. Elizabeth is an idealist. She believes marriage should be built on love and respect. Charlotte, being a realist, is fully aware that the only way to secure a comfortable future is through a practical match. So when Charlotte announces her engagement to Mr. Collins, Elizabeth is shocked and disappointed.
Oh, Jane, it was such a humiliating spectacle. She knows she's marrying one of the stupidest men in England.
She cannot fathom how her friend would willingly marry a man as foolish as Mr. Collins. But Charlotte, ever the pragmatist, knows that Mr. Collins, despite his ridiculous nature, offers her something invaluable, and that is security.
Our cousin, Mr. Collins, is not the cleverest of men, perhaps, but he is respectable. And as far as fortune goes, it is an eligible match.
Charlotte Lucas's decision to marry Mr. Collins was not made in isolation. It was deeply influenced by her family's social standing and financial situation. Unlike Elizabeth Bennet, who had a somewhat more secure, if still precarious position, Charlotte was under intense pressure to secure her future, both for her own sake and for that of her family. The Lucas family, though respectable, was in a socially precarious position. Sir William Lucas was a former merchant who had been knighted when he served as Mayor of Meryton. However, while this elevated the family's social standing, it did not come with substantial wealth or an estate. So unlike Mr. Bennet, who owned Longbourn, even if it was entailed away, Sir William did not have a landed estate that could provide security for his children. His knighthood gave him prestige, but not riches, which meant his family was still largely middle class. Sir William retired from trade, which meant he had no active source of income beyond his existing wealth. With multiple children to provide for, the Lucas family's resources were stretched thin. Charlotte, therefore, as the eldest daughter at 27, was at risk of becoming a lifelong financial burden on her parents.
Think what you're doing. You'd be a simpleton indeed if you let your fancy for Wickham lead you to slight a man of 10 times his consequence.
The economic reality meant that Charlotte's marriage was not just about her own security, it was about lessening the financial strain on her family. As the eldest daughter, Charlotte had a duty to marry well so that she would not remain dependent on her parents. Unlike the Bennet sisters, who were all unmarried, Charlotte had young siblings whose futures also had to be considered. If Charlotte remained single, she would remain a financial liability on her family, requiring ongoing support from her parents. Her presence in the home might diminish her younger sister's marriage prospects, as they too would need dowries, and potential suitors might see the family as overburdened.
Then she should leave him in no doubt of her heart. She should show more affection, even than she feels, not less, if she is to secure him.
By marrying Mr. Collins, Charlotte removes herself as a financial responsibility, allowing her parents to focus on securing good marriages for her younger siblings. In contrast, Elizabeth, who had more time and better prospects, Charlotte did not have the luxury of waiting for love. She was already considered a spinster, and if she didn't marry soon, she risked never marrying at all. So avoiding a future of dependence. During the Regency era, unmarried women from respectable families had few options. They could remain dependent on their parents and risk becoming an unwanted burden. They could live with married siblings where they would have little independence, or they could work as a governess, a low-paid and often miserable profession for a gentlewoman. Charlotte likely saw these possibilities and chose the best option available to her. Mr. Collins, while foolish, at least provided a home of her own at Hunsford, rather than being shuffled between relatives. Financial security, ensuring she would never have to worry about money, and a husband with stable employment, since his position as a clergyman was secure. By marrying Mr. Collins, Charlotte avoided lifelong dependency on her family or charity. She made a calculated, rational choice, ensuring that she would have her own household and a respectable position in society. Charlotte's perspective on marriage is starkly different from Elizabeth's. To her, love is not a requirement. In fact, she believes love is too unpredictable to be a reliable foundation for marriage.
Do you think it incredible that Mr. Collins should be able to procure any woman's good opinion because he was not so happy as to succeed with you?
Instead, she values stability, respectability, and a comfortable home.
I ask only a comfortable home. And considering Mr. Collins' character and situation in life, I am convinced that my chance of happiness with him is as fair as most people can boast on entering the marriage state.
She also proves to be highly strategic in managing her marriage. Once married, Charlotte minimises her time with Mr. Collins, encouraging him to spend much time in the garden or with Lady Catherine.
Mr. Collins tends the gardens himself and spends a good part of every day in them. I encourage him to be in his garden as much as possible.
This allows her to maintain as much personal space as possible, proving that she is far from passive. She's simply playing the hand she was dealt with. Charlotte's marriage to Mr. Collins is one of the most analysed in Pride and Prejudice, often viewed as either a tragic compromise or a pragmatic victory. But was Charlotte merely settling for security, or was she making a calculated decision based on her understanding of Mr. Collins's character? One key reason Charlotte likely felt confident in managing Mr. Collins was that he was malleable. Despite his pomposity and obsession with social status, he is easily led by those he perceives as his superiors, firstly Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and later, in a more subtle way, Charlotte herself. Early on, Charlotte recognises that Mr. Collins, though tiresome, is not cruel or unkind. He does not demand a passionate, loving wife. He needs a competent partner who can handle his eccentricities while maintaining a respectable household. Evidence of Charlotte's strategy can be seen in how she manages their home at Hunsford. While Elizabeth visits after Charlotte's marriage, she notices that Charlotte has cleverly structured their daily routine to minimise the time she spends with Mr. Collins.
So, it often happens that a whole day passes in which we have not spent more than a few minutes in each other's company.
This suggests that Charlotte is not merely enduring her marriage, but actively shaping it to be as bearable and functional as possible.
I find that I can bear the solitude very cheerfully. I find myself quite content with my situation, Lizzie.
There's also the question, which I reiterate every time I do a video, as to whether Mary might have been more suitable as Mr. Collins' wife. Some wonder if Mary, who is bookish, serious, and seemingly in want of admiration, might have been a more obvious match. However, Mary lacks Charlotte's practicability and social awareness. She's more awkward and self-righteous, which would have made it difficult for her to manage Mr. Collins's long-winded speeches and excessive flattery towards his betters. Unlike Charlotte, Mary would have struggled under the weight of Collins's constant need for validation, likely retreating into herself rather than handling him with quiet efficiency. Additionally, Charlotte's upbringing under Sir William Lucas may have uniquely prepared her for marriage to Mr. Collins. Like Mr. Collins, Sir William is obsessed with social status, making frequent and often irrelevant references to his knighthood and his past visits to St. James's Court.
No doubt you attend assemblies at St. James's Court, Miss Bingley.
Charlotte likely spent her entire life listening to long-winded, self-important speeches and learning how to tactfully nod while thinking of something else. Her ability to tolerate pompous but ultimately harmless men made her particularly suited to handling a husband like Mr. Collins. Was Charlotte happy in the marriage? It's a difficult question to answer. While she may not have found love, she certainly found security, a comfortable home, financial stability, and a role she knew she could manage. In a society where women had few options, Charlotte's choice, though unromantic, was logical and an intelligent one. Charlotte Lucas and Elizabeth Bennet represent two opposing but equally valid responses to the social pressures placed on women in the early 19th century. Charlotte is realistic and strategic, while Elizabeth is idealistic and bold. Through their friendship, Jane Austen presents two different ways women navigate their world, one through pragmatism and the other through defiance. Charlotte is one of the most important foils to Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice. While the two women share a close friendship and similar social standing, they have starkly different perspectives on love, marriage, and personal happiness. Through Charlotte, Jane Austen presents an alternative path to Elizabeth's romantic ideals, forcing readers to consider whether Charlotte's practicality is a sign of wisdom or resignation. They both have different views on marriage. Elizabeth insists that marriage must be based on mutual love and respect, and she rejects Mr. Collins's proposal, even though it would have secured her financial future. And she tells him bluntly,
"You could not make me happy, and I am convinced I am the last woman in the world who could make you so."
Charlotte, on the other hand, believes that happiness in marriage is largely a matter of chance, and that securing financial stability is far more important than romantic attachment.
I'm not romantic, you know. I never was. I ask only a comfortable home.
This moment highlights how different their priorities are. Elizabeth is willing to risk poverty for the chance of love, while Charlotte is willing to sacrifice romance for a secure future. Charlotte's decision to marry Mr. Collins then serves as a realistic counterpoint to Elizabeth's idealism. Jane Austen uses her to show what many women in Charlotte's position would have had to do. Mr. Collins himself acts as a lens through which we see their different perspectives. Elizabeth finds Mr. Collins insufferable, pompous, and utterly ridiculous. She is repulsed by the idea of being married to him and laughs at his long-winded speeches. However, Charlotte views him differently, not as a romantic partner, but as a practical solution to a social problem. Charlotte's situation forces her to be practical, while Elizabeth's relative youth and charm allow her to be idealistic. Jane Austen uses this contrast to underline the harsh realities of marriage and social contract, where love is often a luxury few can afford. So, was Charlotte's path a wiser one? Or was Elizabeth right to hold out for love? That's a question that continues to spark debate among Jane Austen fans, even up to this day. Charlotte's decision to marry Mr. Collins was a pragmatic one, designed to secure her future and provide stability. Though she carefully managed their relationship to ensure they spent little time together, their marriage would ultimately fulfill its expected purpose, that of producing an heir. Evidence of this comes from a letter Mr. Collins writes to Mr. Bennet later in the novel, where he alludes to the expecting of a child. This not only confirms that the marriage followed the expected conventions, but also has significant implications for the future. With a child on the way, the Collins family line would continue, reinforcing Charlotte's success in securing not just her own future, but that of her offspring. Mr. Collins, as the entailed heir to Longbourn, would eventually inherit the Bennet family estate. If the child were male, the estate would remain within the Collins family for another generation, securing their position in society. Though Charlotte may not have married for love, her decision ensured that she would eventually become the mistress of Longbourn, a far better fate than the financial precarity she would have faced as a spinster. In many ways, her calculated approach to marriage proved successful. She not only secured her own comfort, but she also ensured a lasting legacy for her family. Now, did I read somewhere that after the accepted proposal, Lady Lucas started to muse and wonder when Mr. Bennet might die, so that her daughter could become the mistress of Longbourn? Now, do you remember I did a Q&A on that last video? I've also got some questions here, so I'll throw them out. Somebody had said, it would be nice if you could do a video where you actually, give your answers. But I think it's better just to throw it out there, don't you think? Anyway, do you think Charlotte made the right decision in marrying Mr. Collins? Or do you think she could have held out for something better? If you were in Charlotte's position, plain, with little fortune and no other prospects, would you have done the same? Do you see Charlotte as a tragic figure trapped by society's expectations, or a clever woman who played the system to her advantage? And I think I covered that a little earlier, don't you? How do you think Charlotte and Mr. Collins' marriage actually worked out on a daily basis? Do you think she was as miserable as Elizabeth assumed? Charlotte and Elizabeth represent two very different views on marriage. Do you think Elizabeth was being too judgmental of Charlotte's choice? And I think that's probably more to do with the fact that they were friends, so they would have known each other quite well, wouldn't they? If Pride and Prejudice were set in today's world, how do you think Charlotte's fate would have changed? Would she still feel pressured to marry someone like Mr. Collins? I personally can answer that by saying, no, I don't think it would have, because in today's society, there wouldn't have been the same constraints, would there? because women are more independent, which is the way the world is and should be.
We seem to have been designed for each other.
Makes me laugh with the wave. Charlotte Lucas is one of the most complex and underappreciated characters in Pride and Prejudice. Unlike Elizabeth, she doesn't have the privilege of waiting for love. Instead, she makes the best decision available to her, securing a future that is stable and respectable. Her story reminds us that not all women in Jane Austen's time had the freedom to marry for love, and that sometimes practicality had to triumph over romance. What do you think of Charlotte's decisions? Do you see her as a tragic figure or a clever survivor? Let me know in the comments. I personally think she was a clever survivor. Very strategic. And the way that Jane Austen weaves her story in amongst Jane and Bingley and Darcy and Elizabeth, but provides us with almost like there's three ways that a marriage can go. Bingley and Jane, utter love. Darcy and Elizabeth, full of pride and prejudice, but resolution occurs. And then, of course, Mr. Collins and Charlotte with the pragmatic decision to secure a future. I love that. I love the way that those three storylines, carry the whole novel along. Anyway, that's it. That was a look at Charlotte Lucas. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.